This is Gemara, Metziah, Daf Samach Vav, and we like to dedicate all the learning to Mersha Shiva, who's certainly in need of Rachmei Shemayim, Yechiel Yitzchak ben Leah, B'siyata D'Shmaya. We know that there's no such thing as no more hope, critical condition or not. Hashem, of course, could perform miracles, Tefillah, Torah. So B'siyata D'Shmaya, the schos of Talmud Torah Barabim, should bring an aid, Yechiel Yitzchak ben Leah, who, of course, is a big piece in all of our learning. Yeshiva I went to for many, many, many years should have a refuah shalema. We pick it up in the bottom of Samachei Amid Beis. We are 4 lines from the bottom, and we continue with similar topics. And as you probably realize, everything here is interwoven, interrelated. And you also probably could realize that part of the challenge in a lot of these cases are the nuances of difference, are the nuances of figuring out why one is mutter, why one is aser, etc. So says the Gemara, 4 lines to the bottom, Ahu Gavra, Tizavin le'ara lechavre. He sold land to his friend, Shaloi be'achrayis, without achrayis. You're taking a risk. Chazi davakotziv. The seller sees that the buyer is not so happy. He just bought a piece of land, and there's no achrayis. He's clearly nervous. Amar lei, the seller says to him, Amayat sifta, lamaisa, why are you upset? Itar fala minoch, if someone comes to collect the land from you, magvina lach shobra, you're going to be able to collect from my best property, shvacha, any improvements, uperi, and any produce, you're not going to lose. Meaning, even though it was a mechira without achrayis, the seller goes and verbally tells him, don't worry, I will take care of you. Amar Ameimar. So of course the shaila is, what is the status of this assurance by the seller? Amar Ameimar. Says Ameimar, guess what? It's very nice that the seller assured you. And it's very nice that it sounds like he's a nice guy. But Lemaisa, I apologize, it just froze for a few seconds. But Lemaisa, Pitume Mili Ba'almahu. Lemaisa, it's nothing. Says the Tabrashi, Ein Elu Ella Divrei Tanchumim Ba'alma. These are those words of consolation. It's nice. It's nice that he feels bad. But Lefate Mesliboy, meaning there is not binding, and if Lamaisa, the field gets taken away, the seller does not have to do anything for him. Amar le Ravashi la Meimar, teaches Ravashi, Taimamai. What is the reason that you're telling me that this promise is nothing? Kivin de lokeach boi las nuye. The reason is, who is the one that needs to create the achrayis? The lokeach, the buyer. And over here, it's the moicher that is saying the achrayis on his own. Therefore, Amrit, you're saying to mimili ba'al mahu. But says Rav, says Ameimar, elamasnit adikatanil shulacha moisar. But what about in the case of the aforementioned brisa we learned yesterday, where the buyer says, whenever he tells the seller, whenever you get money back, I'm going to sell the field back to you. In such a scenario, the moicher, again, there the tables are turned, because over there, if the moicher wants to be the one to buy it back, he is the one that should have made such a stipulation. Moicher lo yasni v'lokeach kamasni. And the lokeach is the one that's creating this tonight. V'amrinan, and over there, what did we say? And if we didn't explain this fully yesterday, hopefully we'll get clarity on it now. V'amrinan, excuse me, and we say, Maishna Reisha, Umaishna Seifa. And the Brisa said, what's the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa? V'omer Rava, and Rava explains, Sefer the Amar Lei, midaite, that the sefer is where the buyer said that depends if he's maskim, and that's why the his tanai is meaningless. So what do we see? Says Amemar, time adamarle midaite. The only reason why it's not binding is because he said it's midaite. We'll see whether at the end of the day I agree. Halayamarle midaite. If he did not say that, layamrinim tulimi libi almo. So I asked the Gemara, what's going on? I bias. What's the reason? Excuse me, this is Rav Ashi's kasha. Bias, frekta Rav Ashi. You are telling me to me mili ba'alma. It's very nice that he's comforting you, but lamaisa, just words of comfort, it's nothing. Asked Rav Ashi, but we just saw in the Braisa a very similar scenario. We saw a case in which over there was the lokeach, but it's the same mechanics. That the person who should have made it tonight was not the one that did it. And yet, what do we say? We did not say that it's automatically Petume Mili Ba'alma. What do we say? We said it's because he said Midaite. Because he said, I'll see if I want to make good on my deal. Clearly, if he didn't say that, it would be binding. Amar Le answers Amemar. Nasa Kematan di Amar Le Midaite Itmar. Rava means that it's as if he said midaite. Said Amemar. It's not mamish. Said Amemar. It's not that he actually said midaite. You got it wrong. When Rava said sefer damarle midaite, excuse me, I apologize. When Rava said sefer damarle midaite, he didn't actually say it. We make it as if he said midaite. So says the Gemara, that is the reason why it's not a kasha. Because really, you're right, it is betume mili ba'alma. Why is it betume mili ba'alma? Hagufa. Because nasa, we make it as if he said midaite. It's as if he said. It's all whether I decide at that time, which is in all essence betume mili ba'alma, which means my words are not binding. We'll see if at the time I want to make good on it or not. Says the Gemara, another story, 10 lines down, the two dots, Aho Shachiv, there was someone lying on his deathbed, who wrote a get to his wife. He didn't want his wife to potentially have to fall to Yibam to marry his brother, so he writes her a get on his deathbed. Ingid, he groans, the isnach, and he sighs, because Lamaisa, he realizes what's going to happen if I recover. I'm not going to have my wife. So Amrale, she says to him, "Am I coming to Nachis? Why are you upset? I understand that you're on your deathbed. I understand you just wrote me a get." But she assures him, "Ikaimas didach ana. If you get better, ikaimis, I'm sticking with you. True, you just wrote me a get, but if you get better, I am yours." Amar Rav Zvid, B'tumim Milabamu. It's very nice what she said, but in Nachamol, it's not binding. My if not for the fact of Tule Mile, would it actually be binding? Meaning, it sounds like because we just said Tfutume Mili, she's just giving him words of comfort. But 1 second. Bedida Kaima. Limishadia Tana Begita, what's going on over here? She doesn't make the Tanayim in the get. Bedide Kaima Limishadia Tanai. It's up to him to make up the Tanayim. So says the Gemara. So what are you saying, Rav Zvid? That's because it's Betule Mili. Explains the Gemara. No, this is what Rav Zvid meant. Who did him? I would have thought. Who gufei adaita didaka gamer v'yayiv gita. He's giving the get with the mindset based on what she wants. Kamash Malan, that even with that, no, it's Betumi Mili Ba'alma. Says the Gemara, now we segue to the next part of the Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah was Halveu ala Sadeh. If someone lends money with the field being a security, and he says, if you don't pay me within 3 years, I'm going to keep the field. Lamaisa, he doesn't pay on time. he keeps the field. This is what we're going to call an asmachta, your alliance, a commitment that you went into purely for the fact that you want the halva. You want the loan to go through. So says the Gemara, 14 lines from the wide lines, Amar Rav Huna, to that b'shas matan mois kone hakol. If this agreement was made at the time the money was given, meaning at the time of the halva, then kone hakol. La'achar matan mois, if it was made after the money was given, like kana ela kenegen ma'isav, there's only a kinyan opposite the money that was lent, meaning you won't get the whole field. $1,000 halva was made. So if at the time that the lender gives the borrower the $1,000, they stipulate, in the event that you don't pay back, I'm keeping your $10,000 field, it's binding. But if it was made after the money was given, then there's only a kinyan in the field corresponding to $1,000, not to the whole value of the field. That is the opinion of Rav Huna. Rav Nachman Amar, says Rav Nachman, no. Afilu lachar matan mois. Even if the stipulation was made after the money was given, kana hakol, the entire field is kana. Says the Gemara of Rav Nachman of the Gabi Reish Gilusa Kishmaitze. Rav Nachman Paskin, like he held, in a story involving the Reish Gilusa. Kai Rav Yehuda l'shtara. Rav Yehuda, when he saw what Rav Nachman paskint, that he saw that Rav Nachman wrote that the lender now retains rights to the entire field, Rav Yehuda says no, he rips up the whole document. Amar le Reish Galusa. So Reish Galusa now weighs in and says to Rav Nachman, Rav Yehuda karish l'shtarich. Rav Yehuda tore up your star. Amar le, Rav Nachman says, Dardike kare. Was it a child that ripped it up? Gavra Rabba kare. Rav Yehuda. He said, Gavra Rabba. Chaza beitaime vikare. Rav Nachman is maskim and he backs Rav Yehuda to the Reish Galusa and says, there must have been something wrong and that's why he ripped it up. Says the Gemara, that's one way of learning the story. Ika diamri amar le dardike kare. Some say no, the story was slightly different. That Rav Nachman says, who cares that Rav Yehuda ripped it up? He's a child. In Psak Halacha, says Rav Nachman, with regard to myself, he's like a child. Hadar Amar Rav Nachman, says the Gemara on the last narrow line of Samach Vav Amar Aleph. Rav Nachman goes back and he says, Afilu b'shas mata mois loy kana v'loy klum. Rav Nachman is chayzer, and Rav Nachman says that lamaisa, even though Rav Nachman originally said even la'achar matan mois is a full-fledged kinyan, he reversed full 360. And he says now that no, even b'shas matan mois, there's no kinyan at all. So Eisvei Rava le Rav Nachman. Says Rava to Rav Nachman, let's now try to figure out what's going on over here. So Rava asks Rav Nachman, this is going to be the new Rav Nachman that said that even b'shas matan mois, there's no kinyan at all. If the Malva said, if you do not pay me within 3 years, Hari Shali, it's mine, then what? Hari Shalai, says the Mishnah, then he keeps it. Amar Le, so it's a very simple kasha. So we see that if you made such a stipulation, it works. You Rav Nachman, Hadar Amar Rav Nachman, Afilu b'shas matan mois, it's nothing. What do you mean? The Mishnah. Amar Le, Rav Nachman responds, Ani Omer Asmachta Kanya. I used to say, like you, Rava, I'm asking. I used to ask you like this Mishnah. And what's the reason? Excuse me. What's the reason that it works? It's an asmachta. And I used to learn the Mishnah that the smachta is kanya. Umin Yumi Amar, but Min Yumi said asmachta loy kanya. And that's the reason why I was chayzer based on Min Yumi. So basically, Rav Nachman just deflects. And Rav Nachman says, I glad to agree with you. But Min Yumi convinced me otherwise. So says the Gemara, okay. On the last law, I know Min Yumi kasha masnison. So how does Min Yumi answer up the Mishnah? Explains the Gemara, Iba, you say masnison Rav Yosi. Either you could say that the Mishnah is not a kasha because it's Rav Yosi who holds asmach like Kanya. Or as we turn over to Samachavavam Beis, continues the Gemara, Iba Yisema, a teretz number 2, says the Gemara, Damar Lei, Kane Me'achshov. Says the Gemara, we could say that the Mishnah is talking about a different case. The reason why in the Mishnah there's a kinyan, it's not simply because of the Asmachta, but rather because he said, Kini Me'achshov. So the Gemara is concluding that we really could hold like Min Yumi, like Rav Nachman's Chazara, Asmachta loy kanya. It's very nice that you spoke this out, but it's not binding. Either the Mishnah is like a Das Yochid of Rav Yosi, or no, or the Mishnah is a different case in which he said, Kini Me'achshav. Amar le Mar Yenuka, Umar Kishisha, B'nei de Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. The children of Rav Chisda said to Rav Ashi, Hachi Amri Nardai, Mishmei Rav Nachman, such they said in Nardai, the name of Rav Nachman, Haya Smachta, Bizmane Kanya, Beloi Zmane Loi Kanya. So further clarifying this din of Esmachta, again, that when someone creates a reliance, whether it is binding or not, says the Gemara, this asmachta, when it's bizman, then indeed it is binding. But when it's shaloi bizman, then it's not binding. Says the Gemara, what exactly does this mean? Amar lahu, so Rav Ashi responds, Kol midi bizmani kani b'loi bizmani loi kani. What do you mean? Everything is only kind of bizman. And of course, the question over here is, what does it mean, bizman, which will become clear in a moment. So says the Gemara, no, this is what Rav Nachman meant. If the borrower, found the malva within the time of the loan, and again, the loiva agreed that he's going to give up his field if he doesn't pay him back. But then he finds the malva and he says, V'amar le kini, and he says to the malva, you could acquire my field. Again, it's within the time he could have paid back, but he says the field's yours, I can't pay you back. Then kini, then indeed, the malva is kaina. But if it's basar zmanei, if it's after the due date and he says to him you could acquire the field, then v'amar kini, like kani. My time, 10 lines down, the first line is kini. He's only saying this to him because he's embarrassed. He doesn't have the cash. He doesn't really want to give over the field. Says the Gemara, but guess what? This differentiation of Rav Nachman is not true. Within the amount of time, it's not a kinyan. So why do you tell him to make a kinyan? Because he thinks, don't worry, when the time comes, I don't want him to bother me. So I told him, go and take my field. But of course, what's he really thinking? He's thinking, I'm going to come up with the cash. I'm going to repay my loan. I just don't want the guy to drain me a cup. I don't want him to bother me. So that's why I told him to take it. It says the Gemara, in all cases, we're sticking with that asmachta will not be a kinyan bein bizman or bein shaloi bizman. Omar Rav Papa, continues the Gemara, Haya asmachta, this asmachta, this reliance, zimnin kanya, v'zimnin loy kanya. There are times that it's kanya, there are times that it's not. If you see the loiva, that he's not trying to go get the cash to pay back, he's just sitting there drinking beer, and he should try to be getting the money to pay up the loan. Clearly, he's not interested. Then it's a kinyan, kani. But if you see the loiva, he's trying very hard to get the cash back, then a loy kani, then there's no kinyan. What do you mean? Maybe the guy, Pashit, he has anxiety, and he's just drinking away his anxiety. He, of course, wants to pay back the loan, and maybe he spent every moment trying to get it. At this point, he puts up his feet, and he says, "Ay, what am I going to do?" So he just goes to drink away his sorrows. Number one. Inami, maybe, in the Shachrina Asbeche, maybe someone else, Asbeche Zuze, someone else said he'll pay, give him the cash. He doesn't feel like he has to go look for it. So Elo Amar Ravina. So Ravina qualifies when would this asmachta be kind or not? I kapid bidmi vaday kani. If on the due date, I kapid bidmi, if the borrower, the loive, he's not willing to part with any of his other items, meaning he could sell his car, he could sell his watch. He doesn't. Clearly, Vadekani, he doesn't want to pay back this loan, and he knows, okay, he'll take his field. Amar le Rav Hacham, Defti le Ravina, 1 second. Dilma Savar Kiechad Salara. Maybe he just doesn't want everything to be devalued. If everyone sees he has a fire sale, if everyone sees him selling off his properties, his land will be devalued. So maybe that's the reason he doesn't do it. Ella Mara Papa. If he's being makbid about his land, he won't even sell his land, then there's certainly a kinyan. And that's how Ravina qualifies Rava's case when the smachta will be kaina, when it will not. The Amar Rabban continues with another din of a smachta. We're about 25 lines down. The first word on the line is Vadekani. V'Amar Rabba Afal Gav D'Amar Rabbanan Asmachta Loi Kanya. Even though we're in the middle of speaking out that Lamaisa and Asmachta is not a kinyan, but a poitiki havya lemigva mine. It's not an Asmachta, but it's an apoitiki. Poitiki means apoite that from this land should be the place that you'll be able to collect. So even though a smachta loikanya says Rapapa, but that land he could collect from first. Amar le Ravuna Breder Amnasal Rapapa. Mika Amar le Kani Liguvaina. Why? Why is it even in a poitik? He never said that you can make a kinyan to collect from this land. So Amar le Marzucha Breder Mari le Ravina. The Amar Kani le Miguvaina mine Kani. If he said that, then it is a kinyan. Why? Why does even that help, says the Gemara? Saif, asmachto. At the end of the day, even that isn't a smachta, it's just a reliance. A smachta loikanya. So why would it even be an abaitaki? Allah says the Gemara, you're right. Abaitaki to come Papa Mai. What does it mean? When Papa said it would be an abaitaki, the Amar Le that he says to him, Leil Chapar and Ibrahim Elamizu, that he explicates explicitly, that was redundant, that he says explicitly that your payment should only be from this field. That indeed does work. Continues the Gemara, so we finally got to a case, it's not really an asmachta, but at some level, the condition that he made to collect just from this field would be binding. Ahu Gavra, okay, now we seemingly switch a little bit tracks. We'll see in a moment how, of course, it connects. Someone sells his field to his friend with a chayis. And at the time of the sale, the buyer says, I don't want to just be able to collect from I want to be able to collect me idiyas to islach. I want to be able to get from your best of your best stuff. Amar lei. So even though there's a chrayis, the seller says me idiyas is lama giving alacha. That I'm not giving you. Do you know making kamai? I need that on my own. Al magvin alacha idiyas acherim disli. You'll be able to collect from other idiyas that I have. Lo and behold, what happens? The land is collected from the buyer. So the buyer comes, bidka shakel liide idias. The buyer comes, and guess what? A flood came and destroyed the idias of the seller. So now the buyer wants to know, what do? I want to get from at least the next level, which he promised me. But right now, the next level is his best, because his best was destroyed. So Savar Ababal Meimar Miadis. Yeah, you get from the Idis like he promised you. Amar Lei. Savar Ababa Lemeimar Miadis Amar Lei. He told you get from the Idis. Vakaima. And that's still here, so that's what you get from. Amar Lei Ravachami Tifti Ravina Lema Lei. Let the seller say, Ki Amrina Lacha, no Megavina Lacha, Davi the Idis Kaimi. When did I say you could get from my Idis? That's because my idi is my best of the best I had. But the seller can now taina hashta kaimali idias umakam idias. Now everything drops down a level because the other one was destroyed. So that's how Rav Achmed Difti said the seller can have a good taina, and therefore he does not have to give him the idias. He could give him one level lower. And we conclude today with one more case. Rav Bar Shava have a masik bei Rav Kahana Izuzi. Rav Bar Shava owed money to Rav Kahana. Amar Lei. So Rav Bar Shava says to Rav Kahana, if I don't pay you back by a certain date, Gabi mehai chamra. You can collect from a certain wine. So when do we say there's no asmachta is only on land? Why? Because people don't generally sell their land. So if someone says, if I don't pay you back by a certain date, you could collect from my land, that's an asmachta. That's just an assurance which isn't binding. However, Aval Chamra, when he said you could collect from wine, wine is there to sell. Kizuze dami. Wine is like zuzi. Wine is like money. And therefore, you indeed could collect from it, and it would be yes, be kaina. But Amli Ravuna, Rav Yeshua, Rabba, Chamina Mishmei de Rabba, called the E Loi Kani. Anytime you say D, if I don't pay you back, you get from this, whether it's land, and even in this case that it's Chamra, says Ravuna Brei Yeshua, will not be a Kenyan, and therefore you'll not be able to collect from the Chamra. We'll pick it up from here, B'siyata Dishmaya.